Welcome to the Virtual Sangha podcast from virtualsangha.org. Looking to learn more about Buddhism and connect with friends on the path? Or maybe you've been practicing for years and enjoy keeping a beginner's mind. Wherever you're at in your journey, you're invited to visit virtualsangha.org and connect with our supportive and inclusive community on Discord. We hope to see you there.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Exalted One, the fully enlightened Lord Buddha. I take refuge in the Buddha, the one who shows me the way in this life. Buddham saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Dharma, the way of understanding and of love. Dhammam saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Sangha, the community that lives in harmony and awareness. Sangham saranam gacchami. Hey, thank you, friends, for joining me today. We are looking at the chapter in The Great Disciples of the Buddha on Angulimala. Now, Angulimala is a character that is one of the most recognizable characters in the suttas. There is a verse that is attributed to Angulimala where he says that since he was born with the noble birth, that he does not recall that he has ever intentionally deprived a living being of life. By this truth, may you be well, and may your infant be safe. That's a verse that he says to a woman who is in labor, and there's a lot of context that we'll get into about the meaning of that verse and why it's so important. But to highlight the importance of Angulimala as a figure in the Buddhist legends is his verse is still recited today as a verse of protection for women in labor. So Angulimala is, like I said, a very well-known and influential character. Maybe because he is one of the most relatable in a way, and his redemption story is very inspiring. So Angulimala is a serial killer, and it may be odd to say that a serial killer feels relatable, but if we look at these holy, perfected figures in the Dharma, these great saints and sages, and then we look at somebody who has done horrible things in their lives, some of us might find that villain character more relatable than the holy characters. I'm willing to bet none of us here or listening on the podcast are serial killers, but we do, if we're honest with ourselves, commit lesser sins on a regular basis. And when we really, really, really think about the impacts of our choices, we might feel like we are not that much different, or that we are or have been at some point in our lives also irredeemable. So the redemption of Angulimala is something that, by the size in which he occupies space in the Buddhist tradition, is evidence that a lot of people resonate with that. So Angulimala was born under a bad sign. He at the night of his birth, his father looked into the astrological conditions at the time and determined that his son was essentially cursed. And there were some bad omens in the land, and the king took an interest and was asking, what are these bad omens? What do they mean? And the king's advisor, who was Angulimala's father, said, "Don't worry, king. This has nothing to do with you or the kingdom. It's a bunch of bad omens around the birth of my son. He was born under a bad astrological sign, and he's probably going to be a terrible criminal." And the king and Angulimala's father then have a conversation about whether or not they should nip the problem in the bud, so to speak, by killing Angulimala before he has a chance to grow up and become this criminal that his horoscope foretells. And they decide that because he is likely to be a a loner as opposed to an organizer of uh, these evil deeds, that maybe we'll give him a chance and maybe we'll try to educate him and bring him around to not commit these evil acts. In our last book club session, we were talking about karma and being reborn as a man or a woman, and how that idea of gender as a karmic fruit relates to our understanding of the suttas and the teachings, and how we relate to ideas like gender today. And one of the things that I brought up is how being born of a certain gender or any other kind of arbitrary distinction does not in itself impact you as much as, are you born into a society that treats people equally and grants people equal opportunities regardless of their gender. Being born beautiful, what does that mean in a world where they're constantly changing beauty standards? Or is it more karmically relevant to be born into a society where beauty standards are not being held as the absolute measure of a person's value? So what kind of world was Angulimala born into? When we think about how could someone go as far astray into wild and evil behavior as Angulimala eventually does, we can't look at that just in a vacuum. The conversation between Angulimala's father and the king tells us that he's born into a time and a place where taking someone's life is something that is talked about casually. Life is cheap. It's something that the king and Angulimala's father could just say, well, maybe we should kill him before he has a chance to commit crimes. Yeah, maybe not. We'll see. They seem almost indifferent to it. So even though you and I might not be doing terrible things, the kings, the king and Angulimala's father, neither one of them are accused of murder or being terrible people, but because of their callousness, because of their casual disregard for the value of life, they are creating those conditions into which terrible things can happen. So that kind of karmic responsibility to the social conditions that we produce jumps out to me in that conversation between the king and Angulimala's father. So Angulimala is growing up and he's studying and he's being given all these opportunities to learn, and he's doing well. He's a great student, and some other students actually get jealous of him and spread some bad rumors about him. And those rumors start to take hold and affect how Angulimala is being treated. So Angulimala starts to become mistreated by his teacher because of these rumors that have been spread about him. And so far, Angulimala has not done terrible things. He hasn't been an evil character thus far, but everybody's rooting against him, kind of. His father is sort of half-heartedly standing up for him. His mother goes to great lengths to protect him, but everybody else is just kind of like, well, he was born under a bad sign, and you can't really trust this kid. And um, it reminds me somewhat of my own family and my own childhood. Not as crazy as Angulimala's, but boy, what a dysfunctional Brady Bunch that was. And I had to overcome a lot of challenges personally, and I'm sure others can relate to that as well. I was born um, into poverty, and I was born into the kind of redneck trailer park sort of culture that really rejoiced in that sort of rebellious, toxic, unhealthy kind of lifestyle. And being intelligent was offensive. um, it was kind of a rough place to come from. And the stories that people say tell you about each other, about yourself, those kinds of dramas that people love to make up can have very real impacts, especially when we're young. And that's what we're seeing with Angulimala. So again, it's another reminder about our speech, what we put out into the world, and what we contribute to other people and their paths and the social conditions. So Angulimala's teacher decides to send Angulimala on a mission to sort of get rid of him, to get rid of this untrustworthy student. And the teacher tells Angulimala that, he's learned all he can and he's going to graduate, and it's appropriate for the student, Angulimala, to give his teacher a gift. And Angulimala was not called Angulimala at the time. His name from birth was Ahimsaka, which means harmless one. So the student Ahimsaka is told by his teacher that his final project for his education is to go out and collect 1,000 finger bones. And at first, Ahimsaka is very confused by this and does not immediately go out and become a collector of human appendages, but the teacher talks him into it, and he eventually accepts this challenge from his teacher, and he goes out and decides to use violence to achieve this goal that has been set out for him. And to me, this again comes back to that conversation between the father and the king, where if you are in a society where life is treated cheaply and there's a lack of compassion, and we casually talk about violence, then it's not hard to imagine that if it makes sense to someone raised in that condition, that this is what you do. Sure, why not? Let's go on this quest. So that's what he does, and eventually he comes across the Buddha, and this is towards the end of his quest. And he decides that he's going to take his 1,000th finger bone from the Buddha, and he's chasing the Buddha and running after him, and the Buddha appears to be walking calmly and gracefully, and yet Angulimala can never catch up to him. And Angulimala is an apex predator. He's been running and chasing people down and hacking people apart with his blades, and he's astonished by the fact that he cannot catch up to the Buddha. And he calls out to the Buddha saying, "Stop, stop!" And the Buddha says, "I have stopped." And this confuses Angulimala. He says, "Well, I'm chasing you. What do you mean you've stopped?" And the Buddha tells Angulimala about the meaning of cessation. He has stopped this cycle of becoming, and that lands with Angulimala, and he understands it, and he becomes a monk. The Buddha accepts Angulimala, and Angulimala repents and dedicates his life to the Dharma. And later, there's a king coming through with a small army, and the Buddha says to the king, where are you going? Is there a battle somewhere? And the king says, "No, blessed one, there's not a battle, but there's a serial killer on the loose, and we've sent others to arrest him and bring him in, and none of them have been successful. So we have this whole army going through the forest searching for this guy." And the Buddha says, "Well, what if this person that you're looking for turned their life around? What if they were nonviolent? What if they were a monk? What if they turned their life over to the Dharma?" And the king says, "Well, if he turned his life over to the Dharma and completely reformed and rehabilitated, then we would rejoice and we would support him, and we donate to him, and we would protect him as is appropriate for protecting a monk. But of course, that's a crazy hypothetical because that would never happen." And the Buddha says, "Well, it did happen, and here he is." So the Buddha presents Angulimala now as a monk to the king. And the king says, "Oh, wow, that's quite impressive." And the king offers basically to make gifts to Angulimala, and Angulimala declines. And the king is like, "Wow, this is really like, this isn't just somebody trying to, take advantage of the Sangha or hide in the Sangha. This is somebody who's actually has good intentions." And so, the king asks his name and where he's from, and that's when the king finds out that this was actually the child that had been born under the bad stars that they had spoken about years ago. So Angulimala then performs the duties of a monk, and he does his alms rounds and is doing his best to fulfill this new way of life. And there are a lot of challenges that come with that as well. He's not accepted by the local community. They're not supporting him as much. Some people are because they have trust in the Buddha, but some people are not. And they remember the crimes that he committed, and they feel like justice has not been done by the king. So they take justice into their own hands and they start throwing stones at Angulimala. And the Buddha sees this beaten and bloodied Angulimala and says to him to bear this with patience, to suffer the retaliation of these people, because Angulimala is experiencing the ripening of karma that is happening in that moment that otherwise could have happened later in hell. And he could have spent eons in hell for the things that he did. But by suffering these people's retribution with patience and compassion, he is allowing that karma to ripen here and now, as opposed to postponing the ripening of the karma in the afterlife. This chapter concludes with some very beautiful verses by Angulimala that I will definitely copy and paste into our book club channel. Like I said, you and I, may not have the weight on our conscience of doing the terrible things that Angulimala did, but we may have some guilt that we carry around, some shame from past misdeeds. And this is one of the hardest parts of growing spiritually, is that you're going about your life and you think you're doing all right. And then you discover the Dharma and you discover all the ways that you had been mistaken in the past. And you suddenly become aware of a lifetime of mistakes leading up to it. And so when we reevaluate our current habits and our past behaviors, it can feel really heavy. And sometimes people turn away from the path at that moment. And seeing in ourselves the faintest little echo of Angulimala being told by the Buddha to suffer it, to bear up with it, to be patient and compassionate, not just with other people, but with ourselves. Because in the Angulimala story, it's other people throwing rocks at Angulimala. When we reach that point in our path, it can be us throwing rocks at ourselves. We may be kicking ourselves for things that we've said or done, but that experience is the ripening of karma, and on the other side of it is liberation. And so we can go through these things gracefully as just part of the path. And the verses that Angulimala speaks are very encouraging and uplifting for those of us who are struggling to correct former misdeeds, to correct our current habits, and to recognize the hope that can lie ahead. So one last thing that I want to offer before I open up the floor for conversation is that the Angulimala story lands with me personally for another reason, and that is with the volunteering and mentoring opportunities that we have through the Dharma Spring Temple. And when I say we, I mean anybody who's listening right now. If you're on Discord, if you're listening on the podcast, you have an opportunity to get involved in volunteering to help prisoners learn the Dharma. So we have the Buddhist Correspondence Course, which is a program that is a joint operation with the Buddhist Association of the US, headquartered at Chuangyan Monastery up in New York, and the Dharma Spring Temple down in Pearland, Texas. And there are many members across the US and internationally who volunteer to help share the Dharma with prisoners through the mail. And my volunteering with this has been very beneficial in my own practice. So I wanted to share a little bit about what this volunteering opportunity entails. And the short version is that there is a nun, Sister Faplan, in Pearland, Texas, who is the backbone of this entire operation. So when inmates send a letter to the temple requesting information about the correspondence course, Sister Faplan creates a file for them, their name, their inmate ID number, their address, and sends them some forms, and they fill out the forms and send them back, and she connects them with a mentor, a volunteer like you or me. You do not need to be highly trained or qualified to be a mentor, because the mentors get a whole lot of guidance. We have a mentor's handbook, a manual to follow, and the students are following a curriculum of books, and they get the books for free from the Chuangyan Monastery. So the Buddhist Association of the US sends these books to the inmates, and then Sister Fatlan, having found a mentor volunteer for the inmate, sends the mentors emails with information about the inmate who needs support. And they have homework assignments that have been written largely with the input from Thai, Venerable Tri Huang. So basically, they're getting books from the Buddhist Association of the US. They're getting written homework that was written by Thai, and they are reading and responding to that homework and submitting their responses to the temple. And then the temple scans those letters from the inmates and then emails them to the mentors. The mentors read and reply and send an email back to the temple, and the temple prints the responses from the mentor and sends it to the inmate. So the inmate never knows the mentor's real name. The inmate never knows the mentor's address or contact information or anything like that. It is completely anonymous for the safety of the mentors, safety and privacy, of course. And those inmates get to go through the curriculum of the books and the homework, and has sort of a semi-anonymous pen pal. So the inmates that I mentor, they just know me as Mike, and I write them letters, and they through the temple I write them letters, and they correspond with me, and It's really awesome. So I want to read from the Buddhist Correspondence Course Mentor's Manual. This is the current version of it. A letter from Tai. Dear Buddhist Correspondence Course Mentor, thank you for your commitment to support our incarcerated sisters and brothers in their efforts to study and practice the Dharma. This is a wonderful way to realize our own aspirations to assist other living beings in their quest for liberation from suffering. People volunteer to serve as mentors for many reasons. Some have friends or relatives who have been imprisoned. Some naturally see the great suffering that exists in the conditions that led these women and men to be incarcerated, and their hearts are touched by this. Some feel the benefits of their own personal study and practice and want to share their understanding with others. Becoming a mentor means making a commitment to the program and to the students. Students do not always walk a straight path from their initial interest in the Dharma to deep understanding. Some of them struggle with difficult conditions daily. A noisy and crowded environment, unavoidable associations with difficult people, limited choices about how to spend their time, limited access to materials to support their study and practice. Most of us can only imagine these difficulties. Naturally, students rely greatly on their mentors. They look to you for support. They look for you to be Kalyana Mita, spiritual friends. They look to you for answers to their questions, for feedback on their progress, for understanding and encouragement. Many do not have access to practice groups, and there may be very few or no other Dharma sisters or brothers in their facilities. In many cases, you may be their only Dharma friend. I encourage you to take this responsibility seriously. If you find that you cannot maintain your commitment as a mentor, please do not worry. It is natural for our hearts to respond with compassion and an urge to help, only to find that the demands of our daily lives are greater than we thought. And then he, says how you can manage your responsibilities and how to contact Faplan if anything needs to change. And then he concludes the letter with, thank you for your help and for your desire to share the Dharma and to support our friends in prison. This is true Bodhisattva work. With Metta, Venerable Thich Tree Huang, abbot of the Phap Nguyen Buddhist Congregation and spiritual director of the Buddhist Correspondence Course. So if you have any interest in being a mentor or would like more information about the Buddhist Correspondence Course, you can email me. My email address is mail, M-A-I-L, at virtualsangha.org. So that's mail at virtualsangha.org. So with that, I will take a few mindful breaths and invite anybody who has anything to share about this chapter or any conversation or thoughts about the Buddhist Correspondence Course. I invite you to unmute and join on in.
Okay, let's see if I can remember what I was going to talk about. So last week, Angulimala and Milarepa. I forget if we've already given the life story of Milarepa here. But for the sake of those who perhaps didn't listen, if we already did give a life story, I will give a summary. Um, this is not the whole thing. It's a summary taken from Indestructible Truth, which is a book I don't necessarily recommend given who the author is, but regardless, the information is there. So Milarepa, born in Tibet, and early in his life, his father passed away, and this left their land in a custodianship sort of thing. Well, I think it's more fair to say that like his aunt and uncle took over custodianship, just sort of grabbed it from his family, leaving Milarepa, his mother. I should know his mom's name, but I don't, and his sister as indentured, well, not indentured, but essentially slaves on the property, right? Like in theory, at a certain date, this property would pass to Milarepa, as it should have, but that never happened because they just sort of forged the deed. Um, so Milarepa's mom, who has been, festering with this hatred of this aunt and uncle, tells Milarepa to go learn magic and use this magic to kill the aunt and uncle, because of what they've done. And so he does. He obeys his mom and goes and finds a lama who trains him in black magic, and he creates a little ritual space and performs the spell. And what do you know? It works in theory. There was I believe it was a wedding, and some 33 people ended up dying because it was like there was a stable constructed beneath some sort of building that they were having the party in, and the horses went mad and stampeded and destroyed the stable, and then the friggin' house fell on top of it, fell through, and 33 people died, but there were 35 people there, and the protectors, they call them the protectors, but obviously we're talking about not the same entity, as we might think of with the word protector, brings these, well, it talks about two remaining people who survived the attack. And what do you know? It's the aunt and uncle. And it was, in fact, everybody else around them who died. Uh, Following this event, apparently people caught wind that it was, in fact, Mr. Milarepa himself who had performed this spell that killed so many people. And his family was ostracized, him, his mom, and his sister. And he is stricken with this, overwhelming feeling that he needs to repent for his misdoings, his misdeeds, and to practice the Dharma, because the punishment for murder is an eon in the hell realms, and now he's performed 33 murders. So he wanders the country in search of a lama, and a lama who will actually put him on the path, not the lama who taught him the black magic, who also has a crisis and goes to find redemption because he realizes that, oh, I am now responsible for 33 deaths. So Milarepa meets a Nyingma Lama, and the Nyingma Lama says, I can't help you, but I know somebody who can. His name is Marpa. Marpa has brought the Dharma back from India. And when Milarepa hears this, he's overcome with this need to see the Lama and to receive teachings. So Milarepa goes and finds Marpa and throws himself at Marpa's feet the whole time. He's very, very excited to meet the Lama, meet Marpa. And Marpa, unbeknownst to Milarepa, had received a vision of a great student coming to him. However, of course, the weight of the negative karma is still pretty heavy on Milarepa. And so Milarepa finds himself in a very similar situation as the one he left his mother and sister in. He continues the long-standing Buddhist tradition of abandoning the women in your family to seek spiritual enlightenment. But we'll get back to them later, of course. So Milarepa is put through a great hardship. He's treated like a slave once again, and this culminates in the building of the towers story, where Marpa promises to teach Milarepa the Dharma if he would only build him a tower of X, number of stones high, X number of stones wide, things like that. And Milarepa builds these towers, but each time Marpa just tears the tower down and says, "Not good enough. Try again." Right? In this time, Milarepa obviously becomes very, very upset and very depressed. But he has faith in the Lama and continues to do as Marpa says. Until eventually Milarepa believes that he actually cannot overcome all of the negative karma that he has accumulated. He's enduring all of this because he feels guilt. He killed everybody except people he actually wanted to kill. So he believes he deserves this. But also unbeknownst to him, Marpa is, sobbing his eyes out regularly to his wife because he's putting Milarepa through all of this ridiculous hardship, beating him and insulting him in front of the other students. destroying whatever he builds, until Milarepa believes he wants to end his own life. And at this point, for whatever reason, Marpa believes it's now time and administers these teachings. Uh, and it's clear the story is telling us now. Bear in mind, this is a hagiography, so we have to take everything said here with a grain of salt. We can't really know for sure, but it's telling a message, right? That the guru has the power to perhaps not leave, or perhaps not expunge your negative karma himself, but to introduce circumstances by which your negative karma is expunged. And that's the idea, is that Marpa is putting Milarepa through all of this to prepare his soul, which has been thoroughly blackened by his murders, to receive the teachings, and then to spawn the Kagyu lineage. Uh, we'll get back to we're getting back to his family. I only looked into this briefly afterward, but it ends up that his mother and sister, of course, are now even worse off after he left them to go find the Dharma. In his mother's case, he finds his mother's bones in the ruins of their old property, and his sister actually ends up becoming a wanderer and finds him again and becomes a yogini. Yes, that was it, right? So I'm telling the story because I wanted to think about the function of karma as it relates to enlightenment. I believe that's what I said last week. Because here we have Milarepa as a spiritual vessel that needs to be prepared. Needs to be prepared by expunging negative karma he has accumulated in this life. We don't even think about previous lives. Now, I'm sure if I read the entire biography of Milarepa, I'd get into the past lives. But the whole enlightenment in one lifetime is a big deal in the Vajrayana tradition. Now, we're talking about Angulimala this week, right? And it struck me that whole Mr. Buddha is able to perhaps not awaken, not enlighten Angulimala himself, right? Because the work still has to be done by the individual. But from what I understand, right, the awakening happens and the fetters are removed, and then there's no more negative karma, right? No more negative karma created. But from what I understand, right, is that we still have to have the karma to the causes and conditions to put us in the circumstance by which we can be awakened. And it's curious to me that in the Orthodox tradition, at least in what the text implies, is that has happened somehow. That has happened. Angulimala has the karma necessary to reach enlightenment, to remove the fetters and become an arahant. But it also implies that in the past he was also a very violent individual, and in fact, it refers to. That's why let me actually see if I can. Oh, it's going to stop me from using push talk. Give me a sec. I'm going to pull up the quote here. Okay, yes. The stronger factor behind his decision was probably his innate disposition towards violence, and the text also implies that this is a matter of his. It's been consistent throughout previous lives, right? And I suppose actually, so I should clarify. I did, and I'm sure everybody else who looked up the connection saw this Reddit post where someone offered this idea that, in fact, the karma was not as heavy as they thought it was, because in both circumstances, both of these men were just obeying authority figures. Angulimala was only doing as his teacher ordered, which in Vajrayana and definitely more guru centered traditions, that's the whole deal, right? Just doing what the guru says. So perhaps he can't necessarily be faulted for that, but he could be faulted for everything he did in past lives. And then in Milarepa's case, he's just doing as his mother requested, which in the same vein, you don't disobey, right? He didn't think about it; he just did it. And I don't know if I have a conclusion to this. It was just interesting to me how the two traditions treat this topic. And I'm not sure if there's an easy way to harmonize them, honestly. I mean, despite being from the teaching of the Buddha, it seems that we're giving two very different ideas, you know. Um, Obviously, Angulimala still has to suffer for the negative karma he accumulated because of these murders that he committed and whatever he had done in his past lives. But it's almost as if his past lives, Angulimala's past lives, only exist to create this violent individual in the Buddha story. Whereas in Milarepa's story, it's the past lives are not even relevant. We're only overcoming the karma that you have committed in this lifetime. So maybe he drifted along as an animal, and I guess like a non-karmically heavy human, neither good nor bad, just sort of slithering along until we get to the point where awakening can occur with the help of Marpa. Um, I wish I had a good like harmony or a good theory as to how we bridge the gap here. But there just seems to be a disconnect, which I understand is, of course, because the Tibetan tradition develops much later and has much more influence from non-Buddhist traditions. However, I just thought this was very interesting, and it was something I thought about at least over the past 2 weeks, at least. So those are my comments. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lemmy. It is interesting to look at the different ways that negative karma and past life karma are handled in the different traditions. And I think there are different aspects of the stories that the teachers in different traditions will emphasize, kind of zoom in on in order to make whatever kind of point they're trying to make with a certain teaching. And there are many different lenses through which we could view just the Angulimala story that we don't have time to do today, but we could look at it from a different perspective every week for a year and maybe still not exhaust all of the potential lessons that can be gained from the Angulimala story. So how those different teachings may contrast or harmonize may just be a result of which aspects of the story are being emphasized in a given lesson. And that's one of the great things about the Dharma, is that we can get a teaching from a sutta and then a year later come back and read the same thing and take a different message from it, because we are at a different place in our practice and we have experienced things, and we have grown and changed from there. So yeah, there's so many different smaller lessons or lessons that we could take from slightly different perspectives. One of the ones for me with the ripening of karma and whether a teacher can help you absolve your karma or purify your karma or whatever, however it's described. I think of gardening, and I have some beans and some pea plants that are growing in my garden right now, and they grow up a wall. I have a net that is hung from some 8-foot tall posts, and the beans trellis their way up, they vine their way up that wall. And when the beans are ready, we go out and we pick them. But because it is a net, sometimes the beans grow through the back side and they'll fall to the ground. And in a few weeks, we will have little, what we call in gardening, volunteers, little plants that you didn't sow, but that have popped up. And because this is a garden, the ground around the garden is also healthy, has a little bit more water and a little bit more nutrients than if you picked a spot that was maybe 10 feet away. And it's a fertile ground for those little volunteers to pop up. But what if I didn't want little plants volunteering and popping up? What if I wanted to make sure that after this fruit ripens, that new seeds would not be planted and that new karma would not be created? So we have things like weed barriers and tarps and stuff like that that we lay out to prevent weeds from popping up. And if we put rocks and salt around the garden, then we would be sure that new seeds would not pop up. So we can create the conditions that stops the cycle of seeds ripening. And that, to me, is what is being demonstrated in some of these stories, like Angulimala and Milarepa, is that the teacher is showing us how to clean up our current conditions so that while the fruit of our past karma is ripening, present and future events do not sow the seeds of new karma. And that can seem very abrupt. It's like if we're quitting something cold turkey, if we just stop right away, it can seem miraculous that, oh wow, where, what happened? Why did that person, they turned their life over to the Dharma and now they're not going to suffer all the negative consequences? It's like, well, those things are still ripening, but we're not seeing the perpetuation of that ripening. We're not seeing new seeds planted as a result of it. So the way I think of it is the karmic consequences of my past deeds are going to ripen, and my mind is going to be affected by that ripening. What are the conditions in my mind? Do I have a mind that is prone to unwholesome reactions? Or do I have a mind that is trained and cultivated in wholesomeness? If those karmic fruit ripen in a mind that is fertile for unwholesome perpetuation, then it'll be easier to see, oh yeah, his life is a mess because he has continued on that negative trajectory. But if I have a mind that is prone to wholesomeness, then even the ripening of bad karma can be handled gracefully. And I'll tie it back to the prison volunteering. A lot of people in prison are there because they have confessed. And when somebody gets sent to prison, they can either feel like it's so unfair, the judge was out to get them, and make all the excuses in the world and take none of the responsibility and just become more angry and more violent and just keep going because their mind has not changed. But sometimes when people get caught, get arrested, get dragged into court, they really do have a spiritual breakdown. And by the time they go to prison, they're already starting the process of changing. And so you could have two people who committed a crime together. One of them, his mind has not changed, and he's going to go into prison and become a worse person because he's just continuing the trajectory that he was already on. And you have another person who has already begun the process of changing. And even though the karma is ripening and they are getting sentenced to prison and they're going to have that whole journey in front of them, they walk into that situation more gracefully. They make the best of it. They maybe try to learn the Dharma while they're locked up, whatever it is, go to church, who knows. But these are two people who are both experiencing the consequences of their past actions at the same time, but one of them is obvious to everybody else that karma is getting them, and you see them, rebelling against what's happening, and then you see the other one and they don't seem as distressed, and you think, oh well, what happened? Did the karma just evaporate? No, it ripened, but it ripened into conditions that did not lead to more perpetual unwholesomeness. Now, how that anecdote or story from that perspective might harmonize with Angulimala or Milarepa, I'll leave it to you all to ponder and think about, and I look forward to any continued conversation in the book club chat channel on this subject. For now, I'm going to take a few mindful breaths, and if anybody else has anything they want to add or offer, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I will dedicate the merit. Reciting the sutras, practicing the way of awareness, gives rise to benefits without limit. We vow to share the fruits with all beings. We vow to offer tribute to parents, teachers, friends, and numerous beings who give guidance and support along the path. We bow to the Buddha, and we bow to the Sangha.